terrorism analyst Kevin Mellott joining us on the line. Sir, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Want to talk, now we have heard several different mentions about this shooter calling 911, pledging allegiance to ISIS. Do we know, at this point, there's no connection that they know of specifically, although responsibility has been taken by ISIS. There is some suggestion that this man was self-radicalized?
Well, that's a lot to be determined in the following subsequent investigation. But the one thing that's interesting to me about his actions are he's following the playbook right in sequence of how they're supposed to do it, where they do make contact, they do pledge allegiance, they do mention the organization. The organization is pretty good about having 2 to 3 different ways of routing their public releases out, so it's not so easy to track it. And that takes some time to put in place. And that was all pre-done. And then the second point is that on May 21st, ISIL released a videotape to all their followers that they should start to attack the U.S. Once the start of Ramadan occurs, which was last week. So the timing of it is right on target with the orders that came out of headquarters. And so there's a lot here that connects it, but proof of it's going to have to be done through an investigation. It'll take a little bit of time. And the last point on that is that there's a cleric that's radicalized individuals before, recently got out of jail, and there's some indication now that the shooter was associating with that radical imam. And if he was, it would not surprise me that the investigation leads in that direction and who he was in contact with overseas.
Well, that's, one of the things they had mentioned about electronic and physical evidence. They've got so much to investigate.
Right.
Now, let me ask you, as for, the average person who's thinking in themselves, last year in July, we had a shooter who came into our Lafayette Grand 16, killed 2 people, wounded several others, not tied to any of that kind of situation. At the same time, at that time, and now again, I'm sure people are going to be asking themselves, how do they protect themselves, Kevin? If the word has gone out that people should, quote unquote, self-radicalize, what's the average person to do, in your opinion?
Well, the number one is try to survive an incident. If all else failed, understand that never go into a public place where there's any kind of crowd where you don't know where the emergency exits are and that you're not within easy access to those. The very nature of this club draws everybody to the dance floor, which is the furthest point away from the exits. So, it kind of depends on your thinking when you go into a building or a stadium or an arena. You're there for the event, but you also need to be thinking about where the exits are. Number 2, I think you're going to find out that most of the injuries are probably from the shoulders to the waist, because from what I understand, this guy just kept firing at people running away initially, and then later on, he walked around and shot everybody who was on the floor. But the point of the deal is you can't outrun a projectile from a bullet to an explosive device, so you need to get down initially and then get out. And understanding how to have a little bit of a plan like that could help people quite a bit, because these individuals that are on these type of terrorist attacks are not after you individually. They're after a massive impact. So if you were to be the one that got down close to an exit, stayed down until the person was reloading, and then got out to the exit door, you'd be a survivor. The other side of this thing, and this is really a sad thing, and I know most people are scared to death of gunfire, but to have all these people in the club and nobody take out the shooter is just a sad state of affairs. I know he went there because it was a soft target. There would be no resistance from heavy security inside or armed law enforcement, etc. And he had no problems engaging the one officer outside before he even went in. But the factor that some people didn't jump up and go after him, you're going to die anyways. You would think somebody would try to take out the shooter, and apparently that didn't happen. And that's just a sad scenario.
So what is the difference, Kevin, this is Rob here, what's the difference about, an ISIS-inspired or an ISIS-organized? Obviously, if it's something that they organize, this is a much bigger deal than someone who might have just started following these pro-ISIS groups, or anti-U.S. groups, whatever, on social media that we all have access to, Facebook and Twitter. We know they're using those channels. what's the difference, and when will we know what this was?
Okay, well, we'll probably know this after they get done with all the review of communications between this guy, the imam, and anybody that they're associated with back overseas. But the point is that ISIL has perfected the social media approach for the exact purpose of radicalizing individuals in the West, in Europe, and the U.S. without the direct connection, so that we can't follow it back up to who their senior field commanders are. So they've actually designed the system to be exactly what it is, where you've got these guys that are instructed on how to carry out the target attacks, what kind of targets qualify, what things are the biggest affront to God once they've got them to believe their approach is correct. And this idea of radicalizing an individual remotely, that's the whole thing that separates ISIL from the other terrorist groups, because everybody else has had to get in direct contact and have direct training with them. And they're relying on the ability to fire these guys up to the point that they'll carry out a mission without even being in direct contact with the parent organization. Mm-hmm. And, of course, it makes it way more difficult to catch these guys because you don't have them flying back and forth to the Middle East. But I will tell you that, that we still have got plenty of combatants from the U.S. who have flown into the Middle East and have fought with ISIL and have returned to the U.S. We've got to keep in mind the FBI has hundreds of people that they picked up just in the last year alone. So the scenario, at the end of the day, what is important is what kind of action they take, more so than how they got to the point of radicalization to go carry out the act.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, do you look? I'm sorry. I was just going to say, do you make anything up of the fact that when ISIS sent out the directive saying that it's Ramadan and now it's time, doesn't that immediately put a wedge between your peaceful, peace-loving Muslims and this radical group? Because my understanding of Ramadan, it's a time of, you have fasting, it's a holy time. Is that really where we have the wedge in between what sides of the sector?
We should have a wedge there. However, in the extremist viewpoint, if you commit an act during Ramadan, you create a higher level of martyrdom by doing it during the holy month than you would if you did the same thing throughout the year. So crazy as it is, they've actually ramped it up with their followers to say, you'll have even more glory if you do this for God during the holy month.
Mm-hmm. And real quick, we almost have to let you go. The FBI looked at this guy or talked to him 2013, 2014. I think people just like Rob and I are asking, okay, so if that happened, how is it the guy could buy a gun?
Because when they do an investigation, the program's got a lot of high-level standards, and if they didn't find out enough information during their investigation, they can't put them on a watch list. They're not allowed to even tell local authorities that they have the investigation. So we've got to re-examine that, too. Like, at what point do we say, look, you may not be able to lock the guy up, but we're going to have to put him on a suspended list for certain activities? There's a lot of follow-through that's got to go through from the Justice Department side to look at how we're processing these cases. Because we have this with the Boston bombers, we have with this guy, we've had it with a lot of these attackers where we've already had contact, but there was no actual arrest or follow-up made.
Kevin Mellott, a terrorism analyst. Sir, thank you so much for talking to us. I think you've been able to explain a lot of it to us. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.